of the minutes of the previous meeting. The recommendation is there to accept those for August. Can I have someone move that, please? Thanks, Councillor Watson. Thanks, Councillor Mildren. I've got all the names. Did anybody need to speak against that? No. Councillors, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. Motion is carried. Item 7 is Delegates report, and we actually have one this evening, and it's going to be put by Councillor Mitchell. So, Councillor Mitchell, would you like to move that motion so you can speak to it? Yep, thank you. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Mitchell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would ask that the following statement be recorded in the minutes this evening. On the 21st and 22nd of August 2019, I, along with Adam Wiseman, Wodonga Council's Economic Development and Tourism Manager, and Joe Hewitt, who is Adam's counterpart at Albury City Council, represented our twin cities in Toowoomba at the 2019 Inland Rail Conference. Over 460 delegates participated in this conference that was presented by the Australian Logistics Council and the Australian Railway Association. The importance of this conference to our twin cities is several-fold. Adam and Joe manned an information booth showcasing Albury Wodonga throughout the conference, and I must say did an excellent job in promoting our twin cities. The Inland Rail project is a 1,700 kilometre rail line directly linking Brisbane to Melbourne and will transform Australia's freight networks, enhancing supply chain efficiency and safety, boosting the nation's export competitiveness and unlocking regional development and employment opportunities for local communities. Albury and Wodonga will gain substantially as we have 2 intermodal hubs, one at Tabletop and of course SCT at Logic. Based on this, the possibility that Albury Wodonga will be one of the designated train stops is very real. There will be many opportunities for our twin cities to build infrastructure that supports this amazing project. Both Charles Sturt University and La Trobe, in conjunction with the Australian Rail Track Corporation, will be offering STEM scholarships that will assist first-year regional students living in specific LGAs or local government areas near the Inland Rail project alignment. This is just one of the many opportunities heading our way. I wanted to attend this year's conference as I believe that we must be fully aware of the scope of this project if we are to gain the potential benefits. I will be disseminating what I have learnt to our decision makers both in Wodonga and Albury so that future planning covers as many bases as possible. It is important to recognise that the benefits of Inland Rail extend beyond regional communities. Advantages of Inland Rail for urban communities should be highlighted. The project will help improve the environmental performance of the freight sector by lowering emissions, will make it easier to get fresh produce to urban markets and will help to address road and rail congestion for urban residents. That also helps us when we travel to capital cities. Velocity trains for Albury Wodonga to Melbourne will be just one of these benefits. Less traffic on Melbourne roads will be another one. I'm very pleased to confirm that Albury Wodonga will be the location for the 2020 Inland Rail Conference, and I was honoured to speak at this 2019 conference to delegates and present a prepared video that highlighted many aspects of our great twin cities of Wodonga and Albury. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Well spoken, and thank you for your attendance. Councillor Lowe, any comments? No? Did any other councillors wish to speak? Again, thank you, Councillor Mitchell, for representing not only the council but also our greater community and in particular our business community at such an important conference. And you're right, I'm looking forward very much to the conference being held here in 2020. And it is absolutely fascinating to see some of the work that the ARTC are doing in terms of mapping skills and job requirements. So we actually have a dedicated person for ARTC here, Shane Sykes, who actually works out of Wodonga already, and they're putting together a plan of the numbers of workers that they're going to need, the skill bank that then they're going to need, and actually working back to figure out at which point they're going to have to enter education so that they actually have those people to be able to hit the ground running. So it's a massive project and it's a nation-building project. So thank you for your attendance. Did you have anything you wish to close with? No? Councillors, the motion is there to receive and note that report from Councillor Mitchell. All those in favour? Thank you. Motion is carried. Item 8.1 is the certification of annual financial reports and the performance statement. This is being tabled on the night. Councillors, you've got the copies of those papers. We've had those and also discussed those today. I'm actually going to open before I have someone move that. And councillors, you have been given that separate report where the recommendation is in two parts on that. But I'm actually going to ask our Director of Finance, Narelle Klein, to actually speak to this first and just talk a little bit about the report itself, but also the performance statement and some of the process that sits in behind it, because understanding some of that rigour is pretty important. So if you wouldn't mind, Officer Klein.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I thought I would start by giving a little bit of background on the process that we go through as far as our audit processes. Do we have some slides? Thank you. We can move to that. Thank you. So the process that we go through to establish that our financial statements are a true and fair reflection of the transactions that occurred throughout the year, we have an audit committee that's in place. The audit committee is made up of 3 external members, and they're appointed based on qualifications and extensive experience in the fields of finance, audit and risk management. We're very fortunate at the moment. The current audit committee is made up of Anthony Hernan, he's our chair, he's the CFO from North East Water. We also have Belinda Legionizak, who has an extensive risk and audit background. She's currently head of risk at Deakin University and has had extensive experience working overseas in London and India. We also have David Pendleton, who is our most recent appointment to the audit committee. He has been the past CFO of the ABC for a number of years. So we're very fortunate with 2 of our members travelling from Melbourne and Sydney to attend our meetings, bringing extensive experience. We also have our councillor representative, Councillor Mitchell, and the meetings are attended by our Chief Executive Officer, myself, our Manager Finance and other staff as required to present reports to the Audit Committee from time to time. Our external auditor and our internal auditor also both attend those meetings. Our external auditor is Crowe Horwath, acting as agent for the Victorian Auditor General. Our internal auditor is appointed through a public tender process for a 4-year term, and currently that is held by Johnson's MME. The Audit Committee meets 4 times a year. They review the financial audit and risk reports of Council over that period, and they receive the presentation of our audit reports from Vago through Crowe Horwath. We move on to our next slide. So our external auditors present an annual audit plan to our February meeting of the Audit Committee, and that sets out Vago's plan for their audit processes for the year that they're about to commence their audit. It highlights the risk areas that they focus on across all councils throughout the state, and that is discussed with our Audit Committee, and our Audit Committee then take oversight and interest in those particular areas, and we report additional information through to Audit Committee on those items. At our, the external auditors then come in and do their interim audit, where they come into council, they report on our internal systems, they check transactions, the controls that we have in place around those transactions, they sample transactions and make sure that appropriate delegations have been utilised, that those who have got authority and delegation to approve payments, and that those payments have been appropriately approved. They check our systems, our IT systems, to make sure that they are working the way they are intended. And then a report is presented to the May Audit Committee meeting on their findings from that interim review. there was no findings, major findings that they had reported to our May meeting this year. They then come in and throughout the months of July, August and September, review the preparation of our financial statements and performance statement. They verify the amounts that are reported in those. They undertake a variety of checks and balances to make sure that those amounts in the financial statements and performance statement are accurate and a true and fair reflection of the transactions that took place during the year. And then they report to the Audit Committee's September meeting on the progress of that audit and their findings and any recommendations for improvement that they may have. Our internal auditors, we undertake a 4-year internal audit plan that consists of a minimum of 4 internal audits on key risk areas to council that are undertaken every year. There is also the potential for additional audits at the request of the CEO or the Audit Committee if they have any concern areas. An example of one of these additional reports was the CEO requested a special review of the waste management levy that was incorporated into our 2019-20 budget to make sure that the Ombudsman's recommendation had been appropriately dealt with. So there's a fairly comprehensive program of audits, reviews, checks and double checks, all with external oversight that goes into the preparation of our financial statements every year.
Thank you very much. I thought that was important that that information was disseminated and understood and being provided to the wider public. Can I have someone please move, or is willing to move the recommendation there on that handout that has actually been given to you? Councillor Mitchell, would you like to move that, given you're on the Audit Committee? Thank you very much. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Mitchell.
Oh, I don't think we need to speak to that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Watson, did you have anything to say? Any other councillors? No? Can I just please pass on a thank you to all of the team. I know that Narelle, you and your team work very hard at this time of year to make sure all these reports are done. We've worked particularly hard this year because you had extra workload in which to complete documents. So thank you very much for doing that. It is really important work and making sure that not only we as councillors have the correct information, but our community does too. And I think what you've just highlighted is the extensiveness of the balances and the checks that are put in place. So from checking numbers, but right through to checking processes, right down to the processes through delegation, etc., are double checked not only by our auditors, but by the independent body, which is actually appointed by council, and Councillor Mitchell is our person on that. But we have to meet incredibly comprehensive compliance for legislation and government, and we are incredibly highly regulated, and I think you've just absolutely highlighted that, so thank you very much. Councillors, if that's the case, then I will put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. Motion is carried. Item 8.2 is the review of the instruments of delegations. Councillors, we see these quite regularly come up as we see legislation change. The recommendation is there to, and I need someone to put one of those, actually it's the very long one on page 17, is there on page 17. Can I have someone, or does someone want to move that recommendation? Councillor Watson, can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Watson, did you want to talk to that?
Madam Mayor, I think as you spoke, it's very self-explanatory that from time to time we've got to review the delegations for our officers to undertake the business of council.
Does anybody else wish to speak to them? No? Councillors, if nobody wants to speak against it, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Item 8.3 is the youth strategy. Councillors, the report is there before you. The recommendation to adopt the strategy is on page 27. Can I have someone move it? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Someone second that? Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you. So I've been in my role at Gateway Health. I've been working, actually, and when I was at council many moons ago, I've been working with schools and preschools for about 12 years now. So I can't believe it's actually been that long. And in that time that I've been working with schools through a range of different, I've been helping them with health promotion. So that might mean physical activity, healthy eating, sexual health, drug and alcohol. But time and time again over those 12 years, no matter if they're public, private, Catholic, if they're preschool, primary or secondary, mental health is always flagged as a really big issue that the students, the teachers, the leadership, the parents flag as an issue. And I also wanted to note that this is stated in our strategy that's before us tonight, and certainly emphasised by a range of different data that supports that mental health is an issue. But young people flagging mental health as an issue is not isolated to Wodonga. There are young people everywhere who would say that mental health is an issue. You can see on page 19 and 20 all the different consultation that was undertaken and who we heard back from. So it's fantastic to see also that since the draft strategy came up, there has actually been quite a lot of changes, which is really awesome to see. Sometimes I know the odd person will say, oh, you go out for consultation, but you don't actually listen. Well, again, this document proves that we've actually made quite a lot of changes to the document in front of us. A couple that I just wanted to highlight here, some changes, is there was some feedback around incorporating what are some really good things, what are some wins already happening in our community. So we've included one of them being the Wodonga project, and I know we've got some people in the audience who are involved in that locally, so fantastic to see examples of what's working really well for our young people. Also, there was some interesting wording around disadvantage and framing that. So in the original document, it was talking about, it's sort of implied with the wording that if you belonged to a marginalised group, then you would, that you'd be disadvantaged. But there's some changes that's been made that's actually acknowledging that it's not just because you're in a minority group that you might face disadvantage, it's the discrimination that is because of that. That's why you might be facing disadvantage. So it's taking it away, it's taking the blame away from the people themselves and actually saying, no, it's a bigger issue. It might be racism, it might be homophobia, and council playing a role in those societal issues that actually can cause disadvantage. Another thing that's great to see in this document is that it's got a 5-year lifespan. So sometimes with plans, they can be just for one particular term of government, but it's great that this will last for 5 years. Another change that was made is reframing the whole document actually just so it's a bit more strengths-based, which is really good to see. Something that I noticed the second I picked it up before even reading the report about what had changed is actually having local pictures from local people. So it's great to see. I know on page, one of the first photos I saw was from the Red Carpet Youth Awards. So it's Atosha's in that photo, and she's actually she's the UNICEF Youth Ambassador for Victoria, and she lives in Wodonga. So it's fantastic to see our young people in the document. I think that's all.
Councillor Lowe. You're reserved. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to comment that the work our people have done in creating this strategy is very good. I'm very encouraged to see that quite a substantial increase in community feedback and the adoption of various recommendations resulting from that consultation process. Strategies project a way forward. They're not policies set in stone. So this strategy is a path forward, and I think that's positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm sure I'll be corrected and better educated about all this stuff, but I don't see this as a strategy for youth in the wide context of the way I interpret a strategy. I see this document as dealing with minority youth groups and disadvantaged youth groups as a priority over everything else. The strategy seems to focus on the welfare industry metrics and on those sections of the youth community that assist in achieving grant funding. That's the perception that comes through when I read it. This is not a holistic strategy to benefit and accommodate the interests of all the youth in the community. If we focus on the disadvantaged or the minority groups, then we are most likely going to establish a culture and system based around those minority or disadvantaged groups. And the consequence of that is everybody else gets left out, and the way things evolve and get established across the community gets deflected, and it can be a distorted outcome. A true strategy for youth will not focus on only the disadvantaged or minority, but builds infrastructure, systems and networks to strengthen mainstream as well as disadvantaged and minorities. A true strategy for all youth would work to try and provide services and facilities for everybody, and try and make it accessible to everybody, and try and make it as comfortable and less threatening to all different groups across the spectrum. Basically, I see this strategy as being inadequate for those reasons, and because it seems to me to be focusing on the welfare industry bent side of youth issues, and basically it's not an equitable way, from where I see it, to address all of the youth in our whole community. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Other councillors, Councillor Watson, then you, Councillor Hall.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. And if you could pass back to through the CEO to Tim and James the work that both those gentlemen did, plus their staff, to get this strategy to where it is today. But I believe that we do need to look at risk groups and the partnerships we do with our service providers in our city, and we have many of those, and some of those are in the room today. We're often measured by the physical assets that we do for the youth of a city or a town or a region, such as, you know, a youth cafe or bricks and mortar that is a place for young to go and what they might say, hang out. But I think linking to our youth to caring providers to get an end result to break the cycle, could I say, in some of the areas is you know what we should be doing, and that's one of our roles. So things such as escape bowl is a great thing, but to actually bring them along and educate those youth to become better citizens in our city is fantastic. And I think long should we continue to have strong partnerships with our service providers in our city for the betterment of our youth that might fall through the gaps. So, you know, it's a starting point. It's going to be reviewed from time to time. I think there's a 2-year review, and I think we'll continue always to focus on both our youth and our senior citizens, but at this stage we're looking at our youth.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Hall.
Yeah, okay. Working with our youth is a whole of community job we all need to put in, and I think we all want to see the best outcomes for all the children in the community and youth going forward. And while the Wodonga Youth Strategy does highlight some disturbing figures regarding mental wellbeing, unemployment, youth disengagement, and Wodonga being in the top 10% of local government areas for incidents of child maltreatment, which is horrific when you think about it, we do in our community have a positive story to tell as well. We have great sporting and recreational facilities that are well used by our youth, and there's strong engagement in these areas. And this is one of the reasons why I came to the area 30 years ago. I thought it was a fantastic place to bring up kids, and I still do. And that's why I think many people do come here and who do choose to live here. We have large amounts of open space, and we have good educational institutions in our region, which is a massive big positive. There will always be issues going forward, and as a council and a community, we will continue to look for better ways to engage and support our youth as a whole. I'd like to focus on our positives and promote them to our community, but we need to be aware of the gaps and see how we can improve in areas where improvement is needed. Will we get it right? I don't know. A strategy is probably an important document to have. I think there are some wants in the strategy, but as a whole, I think we do need to have one, and we'll see where we go tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for your positive comments, Councillor Hall. Now everybody has spoken. Councillor Lowe, did you want to speak?
I'd just like to echo most of my other councillors' words, actually. I think youth is one of the reasons why I put my hand up to be a councillor. I've been fortunate enough to work with the youth the last 25, 30 years. I know I don't look that old, but that's okay. The thing about highlighting working with them is how bright they really are. And what I love about this strategy is the way they've incorporated working with youth. So often you hear all the time about, oh, we need to fix this problem. Okay, the problem is something with youth. And all of a sudden they've got adults talking about youth problems. And what I love about this is they've got the youth talking about the youth's problem. And it's about having that co-design of coming up with partnerships and ways. So they're really good at coming up with their own solutions. All we've got to do is open our ears and listen. Would have been great for Councillor Mildren to bring some solutions to his so-called inadequacies about this particular strategy. That we've had a long time to have a look at it and go over it. All too often, people can quite easily pick the bones out of something, but it's really good if you can pick the bones out of it and come up with a solution as well. Overall, I'd like to thank the people that worked on this strategy, and like Councillor Mitchell said, it's not fixed in stone, it's a moving document. It's a 5-year strategy, and it's a 5-year strategy where there's an action plan, and we've got KPIs along the way. So I'm looking forward to working with the team on seeing some of the outcomes of those things and help build the capacity of our youth and prepare them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, if you just indulge me, I participated with Councillor Bennett on a couple of the, I'm going to call them stakeholders, it was our young people actually using their voices to tell us what should go in this thing. And I'd really like to compliment our staff because we used a really innovative way of getting our young people to talk to us, of getting them in the room, of making it fun, but also pulling out some of the hard commentary that needs to happen and some of the hard topics. Because, yes, we have amazing things happen. And yes, 98% of our young people are amazing and living fantastic lives. But some of them aren't. Some of them are doing it really tough. Councillor Watson, you talked about bricks and mortar, some of the great things that we have for our young people. But bricks and mortar aren't okay if you don't have enough to eat and you don't have a home to live in. And some of those stats scarily actually tell us that that's the situation some of our young people find themselves in. So we don't have all the answers. And yes, those are some of the minority groups, but we can't ignore those. A community should be measured on its most vulnerable person and how you treat them. That's the real litmus test of a good community. And then I look at some of the wider, broader statistics that were in there, where we're talking 70-odd% of things. So 68%, we know of our young people aren't engaging in enough activity. So how do we make that happen? That can be a really positive story. It doesn't have to then be about any inequities about how or where somebody lives. That's about how do we open all of our sports up, all of our clubs up, so that our youngest people in our community can actually engage. And I guess the thing for me about a youth strategy is it going to be perfect? No, I don't think any strategy is, because hindsight always makes us really smart. But we need to give voice to our future, and our future is our young people. So unless we actually include this in our thinking and actually have a way forward and to keep engaging and keep making sure that our young people are sat at the tables, have a voice, and certainly we don't leave the vulnerable behind, is absolutely important. And whenever I sit with our young people, this is the thing that I say to them. I don't do this job for me, I actually do it for you, because this is how long things take to come into place. When we build things, it can take 2, 5, 10 years. When we plant a tree, it's the same thing. So this strategy is actually about our future, and we need to make sure we nurture that the best that we can. Councillor Bennett, did you have anything for close?
Yeah, I just also wanted to address those the concerns that Councillor Mildren raised. So number one, I think it was around, saying that there's a bit of a focus on minority groups here. So organisations such as the UN, such as the World Health Organization, would acknowledge that a good thing in a strategy to have is an equity lens, so looking at people who are facing disadvantage. And when we do some work with them, we actually close the gap a bit more between the have and the have-nots. And we know in any society where we're working on closing those gaps, that everyone benefits from that. So it was also nearly posed as a bad thing that we might focus on minority, but that's actually a really good thing for absolutely everyone. Having said that, I don't actually think this strategy does that. And I'm looking through some of the strategies here, and they're things like support and connect students with employers, explore and promote volunteering, work with economic development to look at entrepreneurial opportunities for young people. So it's not just specifically targeting minority groups, it's working with everyone. And probably the biggest point that I have on this one is, as the Mayor said, myself and her made the time to go and attend some of this consultation. It was quite an epic process. So it's called Group Model Building, and it's designed by Deacon, and they came down and ran it with us. And so there's heaps of young people just picked at random. You're not belonging to a certain group, you're just at a school, and so you've been asked to go along to this group. There was heaps of different people from primary and heaps of different students from primary and secondary groups, and they were actually the people that came up with this. Then after the draft strategy was done again, that information went back to those young people. So if it's good enough for those young people, and this is what they're saying, no, this is important to us, that's good enough for me. It's also just happens to be great that it's backed up by local, state and federal data. I also just wanted to make two other acknowledgements. That's great to see the acknowledgement to country at the start of that. And the other acknowledgement is one of the changes, and I'm just going to actually read this one out because it was really fantastic to see, and I don't think I've seen this in any council strategy before. And again, it's around acknowledgement. Wodonga Council acknowledges that there are more than two genders. Due to lack of data, only males and females are represented here. So again, for young people from our LGBTI community, seeing that actually in a strategy is incredibly empowering. And also big thanks to the youth services team, particularly Tim. I know there was so much work that went into this, so please pass on my big thanks and congratulations to him.
Thank you. Councillors, the motion is there on page 27. All those in favour? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, 8.4 is recreation fees and charges policy. Recommendation to adopt the attached policy, which is in all of your documentation, is there on page 31. Can I have someone move, please? Thanks, Councillor Lowe. Thanks, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Lowe.
It's a fairly self-explanatory policy and for the benefit of others. It's more or less just putting policies in place so there's a fair and equitable charging system across all sports within our community. Thank you.
Did anybody? Yeah, Councillor Mildred.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, I'm probably out of step with this because I'd bring a different philosophy to the underlying philosophy that this policy is built upon. And I grant that if the philosophy that this is built upon is applied, then this is a reasonably good policy based on that philosophy. But I hold a differing philosophy, and I look at the use and structure of council recreation facilities as being community facilities effectively held in trust by council for the community. The facilities belong to the community and should be made available to the community. I accept that business for profit that may use facilities might be expected to pay a fair market rent. However, sporting and community clubs are the backbone of our society, and paying for use of the community facilities owned by our society and held in effective trust by council should not have to lease or rent those facilities. I believe more equitable ways of managing and allocating these facilities and usage. I've brought that philosophy in a reasonably quiet manner to this in the original times when I first started talking about management of our recreation lands held by council or facilities held by council. And I do understand, whilst we operate under the current philosophy, there's probably not an alternative to the way we're doing it. But I would really like to continue to pursue alternative philosophies to the way that we deal with this stuff, because leasing community land back for the community clubs to use, to me, seems the wrong way to go about it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Watson?
Madam Mayor, in my time in council, it's been always difficult to, have equitable and have a transparent model across all sporting organisations. And each time we review this policy, this document, it helps get us probably more open to, for all community groups to use their grounds. There are a few exclusions which, such as the Sports and Leisure Centre, the aquatics, the Wodonga race and showgrounds and those sorts of areas. So it's really pictured at some of our open park grounds, and I think, it has taken a long time, and this is a good structure to continue, and we'll get better at it each time we review it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Hall? No? I think we actually went down this track, as we do with all of our policies that we need to review and refresh. I think most of them are in a 12-month time. Some of them under legislation are slightly different. This is no different. But I think interesting commentary, Councillor Mildren, but for me, when I look at this is, of course, they're community owned. They're being used by parts of the community. And I remember part of one of the early conversations that you brought to the table was making sure that some of these clubs are sustainable. And I know that we work really hard to make sure that those clubs are. Otherwise, we don't have those things. We don't have those sports. We don't have that access for parts of our community. So I'm pleased we've done this, and I'm pleased that we've undertaken the review and continue to work really hard and even change some of the ways that we do work with our sporting clubs, because they are made up of volunteers. They are made up of people in our community who are out there doing their thing for community. So whether it be playing basketball, whether it be out planting trees, whether it be doing whatever, those people are out there volunteering on behalf of their wider community. And it comes down to, how can we pay for it? So our recreation reserves and etc. are highly subsidised by the community at large. But when our sporting clubs use an oval, etc., we need to be able to maintain it to a certain level so that our young people or our people can play on it. So I think that I understand what you're saying, but I actually think that in my view, the policy actually upholds what you're suggesting, in that these are community assets, not council assets, they're community assets. And what we're checking is that they can be sustainable, looked after and available to all. Back to Councillor Lowe, you moved it? Yep, Councillor Lowe.
Probably just something I'd like to highlight. It doesn't really come into this policy, but I'd probably just like to congratulate council as a whole on the opportunity it gives to our volunteers within these clubs. Not many people would be aware that we have services available for the volunteers in these clubs to come and learn, because quite often some of these volunteers end up treasurers and they've got no accounting skills, or they end up running organisations that they haven't had experience in governance before, and we've got the opportunity for them to learn these skills, even down to first aid, giving CPR to some of these volunteers to make sure everyone's safe when they attend these events. Myself, I've lately become a basketball coach because I was the last one to step back. So I do understand how some of these volunteers become volunteers as well. So I just want to highlight the good that the council does in the community regarding recreation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. I hope you don't get the wooden spoon this year. Councillors, the recommendation for 8.4 is there before us. All those in favour? Thank you. Motion is carried unanimously. Item 8.5 is the Wodonga Planning Scheme Amendment C132, Baranduda Neighbourhood Convenience Centre. Councillors, the recommendation is there, but we've actually got, no, that's for the other one, is there in 3 points, but I'm actually going to ask Officer Schultz to speak before I ask someone to put a motion, just to give us a little bit more around process on this report so that not only do we get a second information input on this, but also our community can understand it. Thank you, Officer Schultz.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much. Planning Scheme Amendment C132, if so resolved this evening, officers will be seeking authorisation from the Minister of Planning to prepare and undertake an exhibition process for this particular amendment. Attached to the amendment documentation will be a planning permit, a proposed planning permit, and also Section 173 agreement and all other documentation which is required for exhibition. The exhibition process will also invite the community to make submissions either for or against the proposed amendment. And we anticipate that that exhibition process may well be able to commence and be concluded before the end of this calendar year. If that's not possible, it is likely then to be held over into the new year to make sure that the community has a full opportunity to, in fact, address the documentation. Post the closure of exhibition, a second report will be brought back to the council, and that report will deal with the submissions which have been received, and if there are in fact submissions, we will also be asking as officers, asking the council to receive the feedback, note the feedback, but also to allow the appointment of a planning panel, an independent panel, which then will be reviewing and listening to the submissions which have been received. Upon conclusion of the planning panel, there will also be an opportunity for councillors then to receive the planning panel report at a third council meeting, at which time the council will be asked to make a decision, one of three decisions on that planning panel report, and that is to accept the recommendations of the planning panel, to accept the planning panel's recommendation with changes, or in an unlikely scenario, but not absolutely out of the question, is to abandon the proposed planning scheme amendment. So, Madam Mayor, councillors, post this evening's decision, and assuming that for now that the decision follows the recommendation set out in the report, there will be most likely two further decisions which the councillors will be asked to consider over the coming months.
Thank you. A long process to go through. Councillors, there's a recommendation on page 38. Do I have someone move that? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Do I have someone as a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I think Officer Schultz has explained that in a very clear manner, and it is going to take, if successful tonight, a number of steps, more consulting with the community, and I think it's a positive thing for our community in Baranduda.
Probably nothing further to add to what I spoke about last time is, you know, the need for a small-scale supermarket out there, and it's not the councillors or anyone else's judgment to be whether one is sustainable there or not. That's up to any business that chooses to take up the option whether they want to place a supermarket there. I know from the contact that I've had that there's seems to be going to be a lot of support, and just not too recently just driving around out there, noticing all the development going out there. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I know that it needs it or doesn't need it, but I know 10 years ago when I lived out there, I certainly wanted one there. So I'm a little bit biased, it's only because of that. So yeah, I'll be voting in favour tonight. Thank you.
Any other councillors? No? Councillor Milton.
No, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know I don't have a lot of time. I could probably talk about this for a week. the most difficult thing to find about this is not whether or not Baranduda needs a supermarket. I don't think there's any question that people want a supermarket. It's really a question of where it goes. What we have in the location where it's proposed is a enclosed residential precinct, which is one way in, one way out effectively. And it's a relatively narrow one way in, and it's a bendy, from memory, left turn, right turn, left turn street that gets you in past the existing neighbourhood convenience centre and past the existing primary school to where the site's proposed. To me, that site's just not the right site. It could be argued, yes, it's abutting the existing neighbourhood convenience centre, but how big do you want a neighbourhood convenience centre? If you look at, there's no definition, firstly, there's no definition of a neighbourhood convenience centre in the planning scheme. This project is attempting to define it by use of a Section 173 agreement, and that's fraught with all sorts of other risks, but we won't go there. If you were looking at what a neighbourhood convenience centre might be, I would suggest you look at something like Federation Park Shops. That is a neighbourhood convenience centre. Building a 1,300 to 1,500 square metre supermarket's not neighbourhood in that context, particularly when you've got a circa 20,000 square metre designated commercial centre in a very close proximity to this location. And ideally, why not start trying to encourage development of that centre and deal with things to look at the long term? Because once that centre starts to develop, this location, if it's developed as a supermarket, will cease to be a supermarket quite quickly, and I'd suggest we'll have a blight on our residential landscape. The other thing about rezoning it, and one of the things in the first instance, we were informed and advised that the purpose for using the specific controls overlay was because it would be totally inappropriate to rezone the land, yet now we come back with a proposition to rezone it. And when you go through the zone provisions, set aside the fact that the agreement's going to limit a supermarket and whatever, when you go and look through the zone provisions, there's a whole bucket load of other things that could potentially be done on the site once it's rezoned. So I think all of these things put together suggest we are making a major, major mistake by looking at doing this type of development on this site. From all the different things that I've run across, and I know my time's up and I better wind up, but basically this is just bringing non-residential activities into a residential precinct. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hall.
Okay, I've really toyed with a decision around this development because I understand, like Councillor Lowe said, there's a lot of people in Baranduda that would support convenience, more than a convenience. It's a supermarket. It's a reasonable development. I agree with Councillor Mildren. It's more than a convenience store. There are issues around the rezoning of this that are concerning to me. The rezoning will change the residential amenity of the area, and that's one big factor for the people living in the immediate vicinity of that. But I also feel we should firstly have taken this proposal to the Baranduda community for consultation and feedback before it came to us for a determination. I believe for it to go out, and it's going to go out for an exhibition after, if it's decided upon tonight, I think it should have been done beforehand. I think going through the process of an exhibition and submission, planning, generally it always gets ticked off on. So if there's you'd have to come up with a pretty good reason to knock it on the head. We have in the Baranduda Leneva PSP, a designated commercial mixed zone area set aside for development of this kind. The area is not, it's probably less than a few kilometres away. This went through all the planning process. This was just decided that this was the area for a development like that. So for us to be rezoning residential land for something that possibly in the future would go up against that sort of development, could compete or hinder, it could turn into a white elephant, who knows, but I don't think it's really the area for it. and I question why we are going through this process. So, as I said, I've toyed with this decision. I want the best for the community out at Baranduda, and I would have liked to have had their input into this before we had to make this decision. But that's not to be the case, so we are dealing with what we have here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor.
I'll be voting in favour for this one because of what I've heard from people living out at Baranduda, and they've been talking about this, that's meant to be happening for years and years and years. So they're really keen to actually just see this start, and it'll be interesting to see when this does go out for consultation what more people think. So great to have all that feedback. I just wanted to make one point around the process, and all this information is in the report on page 32 and 33. So council officers prepared they sought ministerial authorisation to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment, and they did this in consultation with the Hume Region DELP, so Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. So they were in support of the original document that came before us. And then when it got up to Melbourne, to Central DELP, as it says in the report here, they actually disagreed with that. And so it's interesting that the same department but in different areas have different definitions of things. So we come back to this thing around the definition. So apparently there's no clear definition of exceptional circumstances. And quite a few times at council I feel like we've been caught up in this definition where there aren't actually clear definitions of things. So I think, and again, this highlights that, you know, this isn't council's fault. This is other authorities just not having clear definitions of what things mean, like what exceptional circumstances actually mean. So maybe an opportunity for us to again say we need clear definitions of what everything means.
Thank you. Councillor Milton, did you have a question?
Point of clarification, I believe, Madam Mayor. The previous amendment proposal was refused under delegation by the senior officer at the Hume region. It was, as I understand it, not supported at the Hume region and never was supported at the Hume region.
Have some clarity, please, Officer Schultz.
Madam Mayor, the advice that we received from the Hume region was in support of the SEO. It was when the amendment got down to the central office in Melbourne, where there was, as Councillor Bennett alluded to, there was some discrepancies or misunderstandings or some arguments about the exceptional circumstances under which Melbourne office prefers to implement the SEO. This is to ensure consistency of its application across the state. So there was certainly support for the previous amendment from the local office. It was when the local office had the weekly discussions down in Melbourne that there was the difference of opinion, which has led us to this position where we are at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Milton, anything further?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's just that I noted on the documentation that it was Mr. Standish from the regional office that signed the documentation, so the delegated decision was made here, which seemed a bit odd. If you don't get instructions to make delegated decisions of that nature normally, I don't think it is particularly material to the issue, but it's just...
Okay, thank you, Councillor, for raising the point. Was there anything else you needed to clarify, Officer Schultz? No, I think it's in the report. Councillors, before I go back to Councillor Watson, can I just ask a couple of clarifiers? So my understanding is that the location, when I say the location, not the absolute pinpoint site, but the location as in the Baranduda Centre, is actually included in our, I'm hoping I'm calling it the right thing, the retail strategy hierarchy, correct? That it is actually included in there. I thought it was because I think it has been for the last 14 or 15 years. It's also been, my understanding and memory is that it's also been included in our MSS and discussions in and around that for a very, very, probably 20 years. I know the entire 14 years that I've been here, it's certainly been there. another question that I have is I'm sorry, this is without notice, but the current size of the IGA out on Parkers Road, can you tell me the size of that? I'm trying to get a visual so that the community can understand what size they should expect out there.
Madam Mayor, I'd be speculating. I did have a number at the back of my mind, but I don't have it at the moment, so I do beg your pardon.
Okay, that's okay. If you could just let us know, because in my mind, that's the size that we're sort of talking about without necessarily the petrol garage, but certainly the size. And then I guess my last question to you is to confirm that should this be passed tonight, this motion, that the community at large, particularly the Baranduda community, but the wider community who may actually be considering moving out there with all the new development, etc., do actually through the formal process get to comment, get to have input and get to have their say. That's correct?
Madam Mayor, that's correct, and councils and senior planning staff will also avail themselves to discuss the proposal with any of the community members, either within or without of Baranduda, to certainly have the discussions with them. So absolutely, there will be opportunities afforded and time as well. So we do look forward to, if the resolution is carried, to commence with those with that exhibition and the discussions with interested parties.
Thank you. And my last question, so you can stay on, is that the trigger to raise this C-132 is actually, or has actually been triggered by the investors who actually want to produce this facility out at Baranduda.
Madam Mayor, I think as you alluded to a little earlier, this has been on the cards for at least certainly the 10 years that I've been involved with the Wodonga City Council. So there have been repeated requests for this work to be considered. And certainly the developers out there, the owners of the land, have been working with a proponent to progress a centre out there.
And sorry, I do have one final question. My final question is that, well, we talk about a secondary CBD to the Leneva Baranduda in the Leneva Baranduda structure plan. We don't actually foresee that to be kicking off at 10, 15, I'll be a very old lady, 20 years by the time it kicks off. Is that the sort of timing in terms of, I'm sorry, but my memory's a bit hazy on that.
Madam Mayor, I think that would probably be a fair representation of the rate of development that is going to occur in the Neva Baranduda new town centre. It's going to be in the 15, 20, 25 year time frame, I would imagine. But we know that a range of other factors could expedite that and similarly could set it back. So, but it wouldn't be next year or the year thereafter. It's most likely to be in the longer term.
So if we get a fast train, we should expect it sooner, but
Correct.
If we continue at the current growth rate, it's about 15 to 20.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm keen to get the community's feedback on this, and the way to do that for me is actually to put this out for exhibition. So we apply to the, getting this right, the planning minister to put this out for exhibition. So I'm looking forward to the other times that it comes back to us when we certainly have some of that community feedback. Councillor Bennett, did you have a question?
No, I've possibly got an answer to your question.
Oh.
So when this first came up, I actually asked Leon the exact same question, and I've gone back to my information, and Leon said the size comparison is the actual shop space, so not the car parking, but the shop space of the Aldi in the White Box Rise, the actual shop space.
Super, thank you. Thank you very much. That's very visual, so that really helps. Thank you so much. Back to Councillor Watson, did you have anything for close?
I'm just very impressed with Councillor Bennett's IT skills and getting some information very quickly at the council meeting. But Madam Mayor, I think we've spoken enough with the recommendation. We should put it.
Thank you. Councillors, the motion is there before us. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Division, councillors, I'm not going to read that whole motion out. If you would excuse me, there is the 3 points there. Councillors, all those in favour? Councillor Watson, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Speedy, Councillor Lowe. Against? Councillor Mildren, Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Hall. Motion is carried. Item 8.6 is Coyles Road, McFarlane's Hill proposed road proclamation and discontinuance. I think the Director of Planning must have made up those words. Okay, we've got a pretty long recommendation there on page 42. Do I have someone move this, please? Councillor Mildren, Councillor Lowe to second. Thank you. The two M's. Councillor Mildren, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In the scheme of things, this is a bit of housekeeping really, because right across Australia, or Victoria particularly, there's a whole bunch of government roads where the road itself isn't within the actual road reserve. And in essence, what this is seeking to achieve is to change the actual road reserve to reflect the road. So really, in a way, it's housekeeping. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And dare we say common sense for planning? Councillor Lowe, did you have comments? Other councillors? It is kind of interesting, isn't it, Councillor Mildren, when you see where the road actually is to where it was supposed to be. I'm sure that the surveyor of the time was looking through a different lens, either that or forgot his glasses. Yes.
I'd just like to say that, yeah, the road that they're closing, well, there isn't really a road there.
It's a bit of hill.
Yeah, and if for it to be sort of, if you took it back to where it should have been, you would be knocking out a lot of bush, and it wouldn't be a great environmental decision. So it makes sense to keep it where it is and to close, just as a planning anomaly is to just adjust the plan accordingly.
Thank you. Councillor Mildren, anything to close?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just, it's really interesting to note how all these things come about, and you make reference to the planning and survey and so on. The survey that created this road would have been done before anybody had embryonically even thought about what the concept of planning should be. And basically, one of the biggest issues that we faced, particularly in North East and some of the outer reaches away from Melbourne, the further away from Melbourne, the worse it got, was a lot of these surveys were done based on desktop assessments of preliminary surveys that were largely terrain surveys that might have been done a few years earlier. The likes of Mitchell and others that went through and did the original surveys, a lot of the actual cadastral survey that was imposed over the landscape was done from a desktop in Melbourne. So we ended up with some of these sorts of anomalies.
Without a computer.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam.
Councillors, the motion is there before us. All those in favour? Thank you. Motion is carried. Item 8.7 is release of covenant AC 867382G from lots 2 and 3, PS 741672. Councillors are given an alternate recommendation other than what is on page 48. So, councillors, you have that piece of paper. Do I have someone who wants to move that? Thank you. You want to put an alternate motion? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just item 1, because I don't think item 2 is necessary. That's belts and braces, even tautology. I'll move that just item number 1.
So you're moving that council release covenant AC, I won't read that again, for lot 2 and 3. That's all you're moving. Councillors, do I have a seconder? Councillor Hall, Councillor Mildren, do you want to discuss that, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The explanation that's been given in relation to what this covenant's all about and the information that's been provided that we don't think that it applies to any other land suggests that it should be removed. So from that point of view, removing the covenant's fine, and I am of the firm opinion that the CEO already has delegated authority under the system of delegations that we have to actually make any decisions on any future matters. And if they're the same covenant, then it's common sense that he'll just act on it. So I don't think there's a need to put it in there. I think it's belts and braces and overkill and everything else. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Any other councillors? Can I just ask a question of Officer Schultz, because you sent through an email to all of us earlier today to say that in actual fact all of the lots fronting, is it Kiwa Valley Highway, actually are encumbered with the same covenant. Can you just give me some clarity, please?
Madam Mayor, it's our information, and while we didn't draw all the titles for all the properties within the industrial estate, we had a look at those fronting the Kiwa, and they have similarly worded covenants, but they are generally also all developed, so they are of less a perceived impediment than perhaps this one is on 1A Mother Street. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm happy to support you, Councillor Mildren, given that so long as it doesn't impinge the other ones, and it does clear the site for sensible removal and certainly a sensible way forward. Councillor Mildren, did you have anything to close?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just at the moment, I'm not receiving emails. I've got a technology issue at the minute, so I didn't receive the email from Officer Schultz to say that they had done that investigation and found other covenants that were similar. But I don't think it makes any difference to the resolution. The fact of the matter is, if somebody comes in later and says, please remove the other covenant, and it's fundamentally the same principle, I think we're setting the precedent here. The CEO be well within policy bounds to follow that and remove the other ones. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, the motion is there before us, of just the one item on that possible motion sheet. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 9.1, Recreational Facilities Governance Review Update. The recommendation to receive and note the review is on page 53. Do I have someone move this? Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Watson. Seconder? Thanks, Councillor Bennett. I think I need to give you all coffee before you come in of a Monday evening. Councillor Watson.
Oh, Madam Mayor, it's all very self-explanatory in the attachments, so attachment A, so no further comment.
Did anyone need to speak against this? Otherwise, I'm going to put the motion. Councillors, all those in favour? Thank you. Motion is carried unanimously. Item 10.1 is the finance report for August. The recommendation is for information only. So, councillors, did anybody need to have any commentary or had any further questions? No. 10.2 is the planning report for August, again for information only. Any questions or comments? No? Looks like we've had a busy time in August. Item 10.3 is the building report, again for information only. Is there any comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Bennett.
I look forward to sticky beaking at 148 Frederick Street Road, Leneva. They're building quite an epic dwelling, 778 grand's worth.
Cool. It is an epic dwelling. Thank you. Item 10.4 is the competitive services report, again for information only. Is there any comments or questions? No. 10.5, assemblies of councillors, again for information only. Decisions register 10.6, whizzing through these tonight. Again for information only. Notices of motion, of which there are none. 12, petitions, of which there are none. Item 13 is the appointment of authorised officers. This has to be done in accordance with the Planning Environment Act. So there is the recommendation on page 89. Can I have someone move that, please? Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Mildren, any comments?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Whilst I don't know the officers involved, it's really important that our officers that are in positions of the nature of these positions have the protection of authorisation. Such things as simply as entering a site to do a site inspection requires authorisation under the Act, and without it, then there's, however small, an element of risk. So I think it's timely and good to see it being done. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Bennett, any comments? Thank you, and I'd actually just like to say thank you to our governance officer, because he certainly keeps us abreast not only of our delegated authorities but also of making sure that we keep on track with this stuff, because you're absolutely correct, Councillor Mildren, it is very important. If there is no one to speak against, councillors, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you, motion is carried unanimously. Item 14 is general business, which I believe Councillor Watson has one.
Madam Mayor, so I don't delay the meeting too long, I'll be as quick as I can. On Saturday evening, just past, Councillor Mitchell and myself attended Wodonga Apex 1500th dinner, and that's quite an achievement for our city. Our past councillor and Mayor Les Boys, I believe was one of the founding members with the charter back in the 50s. And what's occurred with that particular service club is they have done an amazing amount of fundraising over that period of time. Some things were the maternity hospital in Wodonga when I was involved in the club. They currently today do the Australia Day barbecue breakfast. They support the Wodonga Brass with barbecues during that event at Carols by Candlelight. But what it also does, it brings young people into service and build better citizens for our community. There are only 7 members currently now, and they're still going, and the founding club in Geelong actually has folded. So we are still doing amazing things in our city. They have Senior Active that helps support these 7 members of Wodonga Apex Club, but I think the word is going out, let's get the message out and support Wodonga Apex, because it breeds a great deal of leadership for our community, and part of that is it gave me the confidence to stand for council. I'm sure it helped Brian Mitchell or Councillor Mitchell stand as well, and Councillor Mitchell is a life member of that club, so it just shows you that young people getting into service at an early stage develops our community as a whole. So we were very honoured to be there on Saturday night to hear a few stories and some of the great things that the club does. And our council, we couldn't do half the things without service clubs doing their voluntary hours, and just goes back to that voluntary part of our community. So, Madam Mayor, I have taken up a bit of time, but it is a important milestone that Wodonga Apex has achieved.
Absolutely, that's a lot of dinners, and I think you're right, Councillor Watson, knowing what our service clubs do. I'd love to know how much it is they've actually contributed in not only dollar terms but also volunteer hours over those years. So thank you for doing that, and I think what a great ad. So perhaps it might get picked up by our media to suggest that people might want to get involved. Would be really good. Thank you. Is there any other? Yeah, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did want to make comment about my participation in the Wodonga City Council Audit Committee meetings that I've attended.
Fantastic.
Would you
Good.
consider that appropriate at the moment?
I don't see why not.
Okay. Last Wednesday, I attended my 3rd Wodonga City Council Audit Committee meeting. At this meeting, we were presented with the Wodonga City Council annual financial statement for the year ended June 30, 2019, the Wodonga City Council report of operations and performance statement for June 2019, the Victorian Auditor General's report. This included a summary of their audit findings along with their closing report for the year ended June 30, a letter from the Victorian Ombudsman confirming that Wodonga Council has implemented the recommendations regarding waste management and the waste management levy overcharge, and to her satisfaction, the matter is now closed. Further to this, the Deputy Ombudsman, Megan Philpott, commended Council for the adoption of their waste management reserve policy. A detailed review of Council human resources management was discussed. A Treasury report giving details of Council's investments and loans, as well as details of compliance with investment policy. A September 2019 Victorian Audit General's Performance Audit Update. All of these items were discussed by the committee and various decisions made. A September 2019 Victorian Audit General's Performance Audit Update was also presented. Further to all that, I would like to advise everyone that our audit committee members are all preeminent in their field of audit, and I must say their thoroughness and candid spotlighting of even the smallest issue ensures that Wodonga City Council gains exceptional insight and guidance that is second to none. I'm pleased to confirm that the certification of the annual financial report and performance statement is complete and ready to be signed off. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell, thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive view, and it certainly gives us great insight and, from councillors' perspective, great comfort to know that our independent committee is so thorough and so robust. So thank you very much for presenting us with that. Councillors, if there's nothing else, I'll move us to item 15, which is urgent business, of which there is none. Item 18, confidential urgent business, of which there is none. So that leaves me to close this evening's meeting and invite everybody here in the gallery for a cup of tea just out in the foyer, and to invite you to our next meeting in October, on October the 21st. Thank you, and enjoy your evening, councillors and staff. Thank you.